Now, as you all are very well aware, we have, of course, a lot of projects that are being worked on the current Star Wars roadmap by Disney, a lot of which, by the way, is going to be announced at this year's Celebration event in April over in London, as well as at D23 that's going to take place later this year, and even more events in 2024 is going to really expand the roadmap and Disney releasing it to the public. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future Star Wars updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the great and kind support. Now that brings us to George Lucas. Now we know that he's working very closely with John and Dave on the future of the franchise and where things are really heading and how he's really regulating and balancing things out between Legends material and Disney canon and exactly how it's going to coexist. So there's a lot of things happening with that. There's also a lot of other things happening with Kathleen Kennedy's driven projects like the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew, which aren't looking too hot right now. There's a lot of, production problems. There's a lot of cast and crew drama. I mean, the list goes on and on with those two shows. But anyways, I digress. The thing that has a lot to do with George Lucas also involves him saving the fans from what could have very well been, by far, the biggest backlash since The Last Jedi back in 2017. And we're going to be going into every single detail about what recently happened between George Lucas and Kathleen Kennedy, and specifically how Disney CEO Bob Iger and the previous one, Bob Chapek, was in the middle of all of this. So let's tap right into all of this. Now, given that George Lucas is absolutely clear on what he wants to do, right now George is actually very close with John and Dave on expanding the roadmap for the Star Wars franchise. However, currently George Lucas is beginning to make many great changes behind the scenes along with John and Dave as well. Now, it's noted that just recently, George approved the cancellation of a very controversial Star Wars project that was being led by Kathleen Kennedy for the past 2 years. Now, it's described that George recently canceled a Star Wars TV show led by Kathleen Kennedy that remained on the roadmap until now, just recently, that was set to retcon the entire original trilogy movies. Now, the Star Wars project was aimed to be an animated show in realistic animation style that was going to change the entire story of the original movies around and, of course, and would be considered canon in the Star Wars universe. This is something that Bob Chapek was in the process of canceling for quite some time, and recently Bob Iger gave Lucas the actual go-ahead to approve the cancellation of this series that was aimed to release in 2025. So let me just stop right here for a second. So we kind of talked about this lightly about, I would say, give or take about 6 months ago, roughly speaking. This show was actually going to be an animated series, but in realistic style. So kind of think like video game cutscenes, right? That realistic animation style. Anyways, this entire show, 10 to 12 episodes long, was set to actually retcon the entirety of the original trilogy. And it was going to focus on Luke, Han, and Leia, completely just changing all of the lore in the originals, and Kathleen Kennedy had this all mapped out and planned out. And George Lucas was not happy about this, as you could imagine, for the past year and a half. Now, this project was in limbo for a very long time since Kennedy lost her creative power, for the most part at least, and it really wasn't going anywhere. It was just actually taking up a 2025 TV show spot. And now that has been officially cleared and is going to be filled in with something else. Now, the thing about this is that this would have, without a doubt, I think, could have very well been the final nail in the coffin for Star Wars. And that's not just hyperbole, that's not over-exaggerating. I really do believe that this show would have really just destroyed the Star Wars universe and would have really kind of turned all the fans away. Because it's not like the animation style was going to be like Rebels or Clone Wars. It was going to be very realistic animation, where it was kind of like that bridge between realism and animation, almost making it, you know, like you could connect to it, like it's actually lifelike. So it was going to be all motion capture. It was going to be this big deal, this big thing that was going to completely just reset the original trilogy in very controversial ways, mind you. Now, with that being said, Lucas finally made the final call on just canceling this entirely. Kathleen Kennedy, as you all imagine, is not happy about this. She's actually very much angry about what George recently finalized. So with that being said, further, the series was aimed to change the stories of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Leia quite drastically, to the point that Disney board members knew this was going to create the biggest backlash since Episode 8 by Rian Johnson, and knew they had to take this off the roadmap ASAP. Now, Mark Hamill in the beginning was requested by Kathleen Kennedy to voice Luke Skywalker, and he absolutely refused to do so, as well as Harrison Ford, and others like Billy D. Williams, who wanted no part in such a project as controversial as this one. So, that's a big deal. When you have actors like Mark, Billy, and Harrison refusing to even come back to do voiceover work or motion capture work, that just goes to show you that Kathleen Kennedy failed terribly. And that Disney too failed by even allowing this in the beginning, you know, a year and a half ago. Why Disney in their right mind would even allow such a thing to even move forward, even for just a day, is mind-boggling. I don't know why. I don't know why Chapek, you know, at the time signed on for this. I guess Kathleen Kennedy was kind of holding back on what her true intentions were with this series, because at the time, a year and a half ago, it was only labeled as an animated retelling of episodes 4 through 6. Not that it was going to retcon everything, just that it was going to be a retelling. So there you have it. I mean, that's a big deal. That is a big problem. This would have been the biggest and most controversial thing by Kathleen Kennedy if it did indeed move forward. I think that this could have very well made The Last Jedi Backlash look like nothing, without a doubt. That's my full belief right then and there. Now, given that, of course, Hamill, Ford, and Williams did not want to return, it just goes to show you that they actually at least have some form of respect for the fans. And you know what? That's actually quite, you know, an honor. The fact that they turned this down, the fact that they said, no, we're not doing this, we're not going to be a part of that. Because they knew what Kathleen Kennedy was up to, they knew what she was going to do, and George literally just saved the fandom from what would have been probably not just the biggest backlash in Star Wars, but the biggest backlash in pop culture when it comes to just movies and or TV shows out there in history. So overall, guys, I'm very intrigued to hear what you guys have to say about this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, let me know what you guys have to say about all of this below, and I'll catch you guys next time.